So yeah, he asked that question, if you were to die, and God said, why should I let you in, kind of thing, and really pointed me to, because you promised, and turned it from my security being in what I do and what I say and rededicate, all that kind of stuff, and pointing me to the one who secures me.
Welcome to this week's episode of the His Hill Podcast. My name is Kelly Doherty, and I'm your host. Today, I have a guest with me that I have known for, I guess it's been almost 30 years. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, almost 30 years. I have with me Amy Jo Moore. Now, Kyle Moore, you've heard before. Kyle was on the podcast about a year ago, and he is one of our guest lecturers. Now when he comes, and last year did the same, Amy Jo came with him. Not every guest speaker can bring their wife, but Amy gets to come, and that's been a blessing for our student body. And like I said, I've known her for 30 years because she and Kyle were students here. What year was that?
93, 94, so it's just over 30 years.
Wow, it's right at it. Okay. Yeah. And so they were, we were talking today, they were in our home group, they were in the choir that we had back. We had a choir for the first 10 years that we were on staff. They were in that choir. And so we actually spent a lot of time with them. They would have known Lauren when she was just a toddler. And Madeline was born that year. Arlene was pregnant at least.
Yes,
yeah. Okay.
Yes.
And so anyway, we have with us Amy Jo Moore. Amy Jo, welcome here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. Now, you're going to hear me talking to the listener here. You're going to hear me hesitate when I call her name. It's because for 30 years I've called her Amy Jo, and now we were talking about this just before we started the recording. Is that now every once in a while I hear her called Amy, and I didn't know if she has changed that, but it's not. It's just she goes by both. But anyway, Amy Jo is more her formal name, and Amy is kind of what she goes by, kind of like she says, kind of a nickname. So anyway, now we have reconnected over the last, what has it been, almost 5-6 years? Yeah,
when we came back for Thanksgiving conference or different things like that.
Yeah, so we've seen you and Kyle, I guess, at least once a year for the last number of years. And then starting last year, Kyle started coming as a guest lecturer, which is really fun for me because, I'm seeing, I've been around now for 31, 32 years. And so now we're starting to get, not only am I starting to teach students of students, but also the majority of the people on staff now were my students. And now we're having guest speakers come in who were my students. So this is really kind of fun for me to see.
It's fun for us too.
Well, it's good to have you guys with us. Now, let's talk about, let's go all the way back to the beginning of Amy Jo's life. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Fallon, Nevada.
Okay. And where about in Nevada is that?
It's about an hour east of Reno.
Okay. All right. So you grew up there. Did you grow up in a Christian home?
No.
Okay.
When I was born, definitely not. Neither my parents were Christians. Their parents were not. You have to go back to my great-grandparents.
Oh, wow.
In North Carolina to find Christian heritage there. Okay,
so you grew up in a non-Christian home. Did you go to church? Did you hear about Jesus? Did you what was growing up like?
Yeah, so growing up, looking back, I just see God really protected our family. My mom had health issues. My dad was an alcoholic. I wouldn't say it was a bad childhood at all. Okay. Had lots of fun, grew up on a farm, enjoyed all of that aspect, a lot of just running around with my brother. And but there were a lot of issues, a lot of things that they were dealing with, and they didn't know the Lord. And so a neighbor on the farm down the road, Lanny, she invited my mom to go to church. my mom would say she pestered her to go to church with her over and over. And not that long ago, she passed away. And I was thinking about that, how 6 generations of my family have been affected because Lanny pestered my mom to going to church. So my mom became a Christian. Later, I did. My great grandma did.
Wow.
My mom's mom.
Wow.
And then my kids, and then my grandma, my mom's mom, right before she passed away. And now our grandkids are being raised in the church, taught about God. So, 6 generations, because one lady pestered a young mom with 2 kids into going to church with her.
Wow. What a story.
Yeah.
That's really encouraging to hear. So how old were you when you came to know Jesus?
I believe I was about 6 or 7.
Oh.
I remember what school I was at. So I don't know if it was 1st or 2nd grade,
Okay.
but I know at school. And I remember praying with my mom in her room. Like I remember where the bed was, I remember the details of it. And then I was in Sunday school, and the teacher said, if you're not 100% sure, to go into this back room. And I remember panicking, thinking, well, what if my mom did it wrong? I'm going to go make sure the professionals, like I'm going to go ask the professionals, make sure we do this right. Like I knew at a young age this was serious business. And so it's just kind of funny looking back on it. But I remember thinking, like, I'm going to go ask the professionals to make sure I did this right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and I just fell in love with Jesus. And I remember wanting to go live with him then.
Oh,
It
okay.
just sounded really good. Like, can I just go live with you now? And so, yeah.
Well, what was it like then? You came to know Christ when you were 6 or 7, and so you did, get to grow up in church.
Right.
What was
Yeah.
what was it like? What was it like growing up as a Christian? Having your family not being believers to begin with, then you become a believer. And what was it like for you in church and school? Just growing up in those
Yeah.
years.
Looking back, I can see how God just really changed the course of my family's life. My dad stopped drinking.
Wow.
We celebrate his sobriety every Groundhog Day. And so, but that was after, a lot of car accidents and being in the hospital with a blood clot on his brain. And we were told if it moves, he dies, and so going through that insecurity of just all of those ups and downs and tension and question marks and being woken up in the middle of the night, your dad's had an accident and, just not knowing.
Okay.
But yeah, God brought them through that, kept their marriage together. My dad became a Christian. And so he didn't come to church that often. He would come when there was my brother or I were doing something, or when there was an event. I've been told that there was a lot of hurt not being accepted as somebody who used to drink.
Okay.
I don't know all the details. I was young, so I don't know all of that, but it was mostly my mom taking my brother and I to church.
Yeah.
So just insecurity, but also the church can cause insecurity too, as far as at camp, rededicating your life and just all that kind of stuff. And I've heard a lot of other people on this podcast talk about that. And I was blessed in high school to have Bob Burrows as my youth pastor.
Yeah,
so
Bob's
he's
been on the podcast.
Yeah. And his wife, Chris, discipled me through high school, which was just such a huge blessing to have her in my life.
Yeah, I bet.
And She kept me out of a lot of trouble, meaning I didn't want to either keep something from her or tell her something that I shouldn't have done. So there were a lot of things in high school that I didn't do because I knew she was going to ask me on Wednesday, what I did that weekend. And so I remember Bob asking us a question like,
excuse me just a second. Is it interesting to you to think about Chris and her discipling of you, and to think that all those years that she used to come here as the guest speaker's wife, and now you're here as the guest speaker's wife?
Yeah, it's fun how it goes full circle.
It is. Yeah, I think that's so neat.
Yeah.
Because like you, she for years, they still come, and she plugs into the students. She spends time with them, and you're doing the same thing. I think it's really neat to see how the Lord continues to do this.
Yeah, she I would say eternally invested in me, and so there's been people over the years who have done that to our kids, and that is, as a mom, that's the biggest blessing. Is when somebody eternally invests in my child, and now my grandkids. That's the best gift that anyone could ever give me or support, is that, so I definitely value and treasure those hours that she spent with me, the meals that Bob cooked while we were in the office, the dinners that I shared with them and their kids, and Yeah, they're a neat couple. Yeah, they are. Yeah, and so he asked that question, if you were to die, and God said, "Why should I let you in?" kind of thing, and really pointed me to, because you promised, and turned it from my security being in what I do and what I say and rededicate, all that kind of stuff, and pointing me to the one who secures me. And so that was a huge shift, and something I think about often is just that it's God who is the one who holds me. And praise God, because if my eternity was dependent on me, not a chance.
Not a chance. Yeah, I understand. I agree.
Yeah.
Same with anybody. Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing up the whole thing with the futility of the rededication and the rededication, because it's how many times I've been through it myself for years, where this time I mean it. Yeah, I'll get it right this time. And but the Lord is so patient and so faithful to bring us to that point where we realize I'm the problem. And only Jesus, only Jesus can do this, and the peace, that's Major Thomas used to tell us, the pressure is off, that this is not up to you. You can trust Him, and move. Yes. Yeah, that's great. Yes. So at a young age, that's really interesting. Often we hear people say, that they come to know Christ when they're young. But then it's much, much older, where they come to realize that I can't do this.
Well, I'm still learning that. That was the beginning.
Well, I guess it's better to say to come to that realization, that the beginning of understanding that. Yeah. Well, that's neat. Okay. Well, how did you end up? And don't let me jump too far ahead. If you want to pull back and talk about other things, let's do that. But how did you went through high school? Chris is discipling you. How did you end up coming to His Hill?
Yeah, so I'll back up 1 year. So end of high school is when I got to know God as my provider. I had plans I even had a dorm deposit down at a school in North Carolina, and I was going to play volleyball and do interior design.
Okay.
And it was the end of the school year, and all those plans fell apart. And I did not take that well, and I full on panicked. And I remember staying up late at night with my brother and just crying. And I had one of those little books that had like a topic and then verses that went with it. And so in that book that night was Isaiah 58:9. It says, "Then you will call and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help and he will say, 'Here I am.'" And I think in pictures.
Yeah, me too.
I very much think in pictures. And I could just picture him with his arms open wide saying, "Here I am. Call, ask, come to me." And so that night, God, I have nothing. All my plans are gone. All of them are not going to happen. So now what? And it's the end of school year, kind of too late, right. I thought, to do anything money-wise, all that kind of stuff. And so I just said, just what am I supposed to do? I don't even care. What am I supposed to do? So then I went to bed, went to school the next morning, and then got home from school, and in the mailbox was a letter from the UNR, University of Nevada, Reno, alumni with a full scholarship, even paid for like my art supplies, wow. Like full, like covered everything. And, in my mind, that wasn't where I wanted to go. Mm-hmm. I wanted to go away. Right. I didn't want to stay close, but it was just shocking to me. Like that was the first time I remember God specifically answering a prayer of mine. I knew he answered prayer, but like my prayer that I had called out to him. And it was just the perfect timing of it is he waited until I knew I needed. We need him all the time. We're completely dependent on him all the time, but he just waited for me to acknowledge it. And that decision for that scholarship had already been made. That letter had already been mailed. Right. And he just waited until he got the credit for it. And it was because if it had come a week earlier, then be like, "Oh, look what I got. Right. Yeah. I got this scholarship." And so I just saw him saying, "This is my plan for you. Okay. And I've got you and I'm providing." So then I went there. It was a good year. I had wanted to go into interior design, architecture, all of that from about the age of 10. And that was my path. And so God bless it, just that's what I was going to be. And so, and then God just really showed me that that's not the area that he wanted me in. Growing up on a farm, kind of smaller town, going into that field, an art field, was very shocking. Even back in the early 90s, just the lifestyle and stuff was not where God wanted me to. And so he took that desire I'd had for like almost half my life at that point and just surrendered it, like just got rid of it. Or I surrendered it, got rid of it. And so then it's the next summer, the end of summer. And again, I don't have a clue what I'm doing.
So the scholarship was just for 1 year?
Just 1 year.
Okay.
Just 1 year. And so I'm at church, end of summer, and freaking out again. And I wrote on my bulletin, just tell me. I don't even care where I'm going to go. Just tell me what to do. Just tell me. And I wrote that over and over and over on my bulletin, put it aside, and then listened to the message, sang the songs, all that kind of stuff. Stood up, and the very first words I heard after the message was Bob Burrows came up, put his arm around me, and said, "Amy, I just really think that you should go to His Hill with Brennan and Robert," which were two friends that were coming that year. And I went home and I told my mom, I'm like, oh, look what I wrote. And then Bob said this. Isn't that a crazy coincidence? Mm-hmm. And my mom just kind of shook her head at me and like, yeah, coincidence, you know. So, and at that time, okay, really no internet, no emailing stuff. So a call was made, and I think Bob called Charlie or something and said, there's another student coming. She'll have her paperwork with her. Kind of, you know, like it was very last minute. So basically packed and drove. And so
did you know what you were coming to?
I knew it was yeah. I mean, he talked about it.
Okay.
I knew it was a Bible school for a year.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't like, yeah, there wasn't much research done on that. And so the night before I left, so there again, he provided, and he told me what his plan was, what the next thing was for me. And the night before I left, Chris came up to me and said, I just want you to know that Bob and I have been praying that you'll meet your husband there. And so then driving for 3 days, you kind of, and in my 19-year-old mind, I'm thinking, oh, well, they're prayer warriors and their prayers are answered. So, oh, that wasn't my thought at the time. It wasn't my desire one day, but not like then.
Right.
And yeah, so came here, and like you said at the beginning, I ended up in the same ministry team, the same home group, the same sifting dirt in Mexico crew with Kyle, and got to know him, and yeah.
And so you guys were here together for that year.
Yes.
What was the year like for you?
It was great. It was wonderful to dig into God's word. One of the things about going to UNR and being in that environment is I knew what I believed, but I had no idea how to defend it.
Okay.
How to stand up for it.
Yeah.
How to stand strong in those beliefs.
Yeah.
And so this sounded like just what I needed. Mm-hmm. And so it was really good. And it's been a huge blessing for Kyle and I to have that foundation, to be on the same page when we got married. There were so many things that I think hardships that we did not have because we were already on the same page. And Charlie did our premarital counseling and took us through so many different questions, and he actually laughed and shook his head at us when we started. He's like, oh, you too. Because personality wise, he knew that we both had certain tendencies to, be quiet, or for me to be a bulldozer. And so yeah, just he's like, you're going to need a lot of prayer. So God's been gracious to grow us both and in those areas. And yeah, I loved learning. I loved learning how to dig into God's word. I loved being around Christians. It was shocking to me that in the first year, I felt closer to some of my roommates than girls I'd grown up with.
One of the students said that just the other day.
Just the bond of Christ, that commonality is, it's hard to describe. And I just was really shocked by that. And so, yeah, the whole year was a huge blessing.
What you were saying reminded me of Charlie and I were speaking at a reunion one time, and one of the alumni came up to me who was in college at the time, and she says, Kelly, I just want you to know that in college, we do have all this stuff thrown at us that that we hear is going to happen, and she said it is pretty tough, and she said that there's other believers in the class with me, and they're freaking out. But I want you to know that I'm not. I know what I believe, and I know why I believe it. And Christ is faithful.
Yeah.
So that was, that's throughout the years, that's what we've, been encouraged with, that it's, so many, the biggest issue for students in coming to Bible school that we have found, the biggest obstacle they have to overcome so often is really the parents. That the parents really struggle over whether or not this is profitable. You're not going to get a degree out of this. Why are you doing this? And we have a lot of campers actually every year that want to come to Bible school, but their parents will not allow it because it just seems like it's such a waste of time. But we have so many people who have been through the program that tell us, no, this was foundation building.
Yes.
For the rest of my life.
And I've said that to so many people of, I don't care what you do in life.
Right.
It is, I've used that word, foundational. It is your base for whatever God is going to have for you. So there's a lot of things that could be a waste of a year or two.
Right.
But coming and getting grounded in the Word and being in a safe environment to ask questions and to grow and to have understanding and create a filter to view the rest of the world and all the junk that's going to be thrown at you it's the most worthwhile thing that you could do. Yeah.
So this was that was your year here. Now, did you guys get married the next year? Right.
We got married that summer.
That summer. Okay, so right away.
Yeah.
Left here, got married.
Yeah. Yeah. Kyle is from Canada and I'm from Nevada, and it was a lot of paperwork either way. I was looking into trying to go there as a student or something, or whatever. So we got engaged spring break and had a couple months, got married, and went up there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about your marriage. You guys were in Canada for a while, then you moved to the States.
Yeah, we were in Canada for 8 years, and all our kids were born there. And
I remember we had a Bible study in your home in Canada.
Okay. Yeah. It was a sweet time. It was great to get to know. Kyle has a large family. Compared to my family, it's a very large family. He's, I believe, the youngest of a lot of cousins. And so, that was great to live there and get to know who they are. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 8 years there.
Yep. And then we moved to Nevada, and now we're in Arizona.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And you tell us, you have 3 kids. Tell us about being a parent. Yeah,
it's great. I'm just going to back up just a little bit.
Yes,
yeah.
Go right ahead.
So I just wanted to share about that first year of Kyle and I's marriage.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So about, I think 9 months, we'd been married about 9 months, and we're up in Winnipeg, and the phone rings at 11:15 at night, and it's my dad. And I remember thinking, who's calling? There's no caller ID or anything like that. Who's calling this late at night? And it's my dad. And he said, I ran your mom over with a tractor. And I said, is she alive? And he said, I don't know. I've got to go.
So he called you right after this happened?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
She was in the hospital.
Okay.
They were trying to stabilize her, and I believe in the hospital in Fallon, to care flight her to Reno. And I'm a lot of hours away.
Yeah.
And so, Kyle comes out, when he starts hearing me crying. And that morning he had just gotten a new job, so he had just given his 2 weeks notice. And we were looking for an apartment in a different part of town. And so he just said, let me get a couple hours of sleep, and in the morning I will go to his current job, let him know that he won't be there for his 2 weeks, and we'll drive, we'll head out. And so I stayed up that night and wrote checks and wrote notes to people and did laundry and packed, and we headed out and drove, I think it's like 24 hours straight to get there. And during that drive, not knowing if I was, again, no cell phones or anything. So not knowing if I was going to see my mom in the hospital or going to plan her funeral.
Yeah.
And so there was a song, God is in Control, that I had just gotten on a CD. And I remember Kyle being asleep in the back seat of the car, and I put that on repeat. And I said, I'm going to listen to this song, God is in Control, until I believe it. Because right now, it does not feel like you're in control. And so I listened to it for a couple hours, and slowly my head believed it, and then later my heart believed it, and that even if I never saw my mom again here on earth, that he's in control. And so we got there, and she was still alive, and she is still alive now. She should not be.
It was a horrible, yeah.
So it was a John Deere, I believe, oh man, if I get this number wrong, I'm going to be in trouble. I think it was an 8880 duals on concrete. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when it happened, and I remember getting the all the information, thinking, oh my goodness.
Yeah, there's even her doctors, who they became really good friends with, said that there's no medical explanation for her survival. Like, wow. They did experimental things on her, they did all sorts of stuff, but she was crushed. Yeah. And so the first couple of years of our marriage are just really characterized by seeing God as a miraculous healer, because there were things that happened that should not have happened. And our second year of marriage, I was pregnant, and we went in for the ultrasound and, thought, we could hear the heartbeat, all that kind of stuff. And person after person comes in, and then another guy comes in and says, oh, well, you're young, you can try again.
Oh my.
And
that's how you're told.
And we're like, what do you mean? And they're like, oh, your baby died, this many days ago or whatever.
Oh.
So then go home and wait till your body gets rid of it, discards it, I think is the word that was used. And yeah, not a fun time in life to go home and just wait for your child who has died, for your body to go through labor and with no reward at the end of it. And so what ended up happening is I later went into the hospital, and they wouldn't allow Kyle back with me, even though there was a sign that said he could be, but they went and got him, and they said, we're losing your wife. We have to do emergency surgery. And so they rushed me in. I don't remember this stuff, but he's by himself in the hospital, middle of the night, and he's just lost his first child, and then he's just told that his wife's dying. And he, we don't think like, oh, you can just open the Bible and point to a verse and it's,
Yeah.
But in his moment of loneliness, or being all alone, he opened the Bible and just started reading. And the verse that he read was with David, and it said, weep no more, for your son has died, and I will give you another, and you shall name him Solomon. That's what he read. Like, he just opened, and that's where he's like, he just opened and started reading God's word. And so he shares that he said, okay, God, I'm holding you to that, that my wife is not going to die, and that we will have other children. And so later on, that was just really hard. You know, having other people who have had kids, and they're like, hold them, don't they feel great? And and it was like, this feels horrible to say, but it was like the worst feeling to hold somebody else's baby when I was wanting to hold my own. And my arms just, I remember them aching, like physically aching. And so I was able to get pregnant again. And about 3.5 months, things started happening again. And I just remember crying. And I'm like, no. And went in, and the placenta had ripped away. And they said, this baby will not go full term, but let's try to go as long as possible to give the baby as good a chance as possible. So don't bend over to tie your shoes. Don't go upstairs. Don't, I wasn't put on bed rest, but basically upright bed. I just had to be really, really careful not to do anything jarring. And fast forward.
And how far along were you at this time?
I was like 3.5 months.
Okay.
Yeah. And so fast forward, I get to my due date. Everything's good. I go past my due date. Everything's good. This kid was born almost 2 feet long, 9 pounds, I think 6, half grown. In the hospital, he's lifting his head, looking around. Hey, what's going on? And
wow.
And so, that's Tate Solomon is our son, and through that time is when God really started layering in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 to trust him, and don't rely on what makes sense to me. So don't rely on, don't try to make sense of things that are happening. Just trust him. And so it's my license plate. It's my business. Because every part of my life, I've needed that reminder to trust him and don't rely on what makes sense to me. So
that's interesting. It was just a couple of weeks ago, I was in class and was asking the students that question, does God's will have to make sense to you?
No.
And then, and then ask the question, did it make sense to build an ark, on dry land when there probably had never been any rain before? Did it make sense to march around a city and that be your strategy for defeating it? Toot your horn at the end and yell.
Yeah.
But then we keep going through scripture and different examples. Did it make sense for someone who knew no sin to take on your sin?
Yeah.
It's
completely unfair. Yeah. When I have a friend who, her kids, when they would be complaining, life's unfair, she'd be like, you're right. We'd all be headed to hell if life was fair.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's a good reminder.
So we have 3 kids. So Tate, and then Zane and Mally. They are all grown now and all married, and Tate has little ones, and they're just such a blessing. They're so sweet, and just God sustained us through growing up when none of them were the same. What worked for one did not work for the next, not work for the next. Yep. And I often remember joking when they were little. I'm like, if evolution was true, you'd grow an extra arm for every child, and they would have a scroll across their forehead of what they needed by now. And yeah, so, but yeah, he sustained us, and again, just trust him, and don't assume that I know what God's will is for their lives. And so that's been a hard one when I'm trusting in my own plan for them, or trusting in what I think makes sense for their life, and it's not going that way. And yeah, God's like, don't assume you know my will for your child. So yeah, but they're wonderful. Love them, love their spouses, like such sweet spouses. Like they're such a blessing to our family.
Now they're spread out.
They are.
Geographically.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So Tate and Megan and their little ones, they live in Arizona.
They just moved back,
They
right?
moved back from Alaska.
Right.
So we get that blessing of doing life with them.
That's great.
And then Zane and Hannah live in Oregon. And Mally and Johan live in British Columbia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you guys are in Arizona now.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes,
okay.
we are.
Well, now, what's going on with you and Kyle now? What's life like now?
Full.
Okay.
It's very full. I joke about, how did you, Kyle, end up with 3 jobs that are all 24/7? So we have an Airbnb that we manage and clean and all that kind of stuff. And so that's a sweet thing that we do together. And we have an internet supply, or a WISP, an internet business. And that's in Nevada. And then he's a pastor. So all 3 things, you can't just say, oh, I'm sorry you're in the hospital. Maybe next week I'll get around to seeing you. Or, oh, I'm sorry your internet's out. Or, oh, I'm sorry you can't get into the place. You know, you're kind of always have to be available. So, but this is God's life for us right now, and it's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because it is. I think the natural instinct for us is to protect ourselves. You know, I need this downtime. We need to be together. And that's not always what the Lord has for us.
That's been a big thing probably this last year or two, or actually even more, probably 3 years ago, of God just changing my mind of, none of your time is yours. It's all mine.
Yeah.
And
well, we say it's no longer I who live.
Right. But then we still want me time.
Yeah.
and then, grumble or complain because I'm burnt out or whatever. Yeah. And so that mental shift of, it's all his time, and Lord, how do you want to live through me today? What is your plan for this body today? Do
you remember Bob Hobson? He was one of our guest lecturers for years, and he's gone home to be with the Lord. But he used to tell us that every day I jump out of bed and drop dead.
Yeah.
And say, Lord, your day. Yeah. What do you have for us?
Yeah.
And that has always come back to me.
Yeah.
It's I think I tell our students that look, I'm 57 years old. I've been a believer since I was 9. And I can tell you this, that as soon as this trial that you're experiencing now in your life is over with, the next one's on the horizon. And often it's the same trial. It's the same thing. The Lord is so patient with us that he's continuing to work that in us, to work in us, that this is not about me, that this is his life, and I can trust him for his life. It
was just last year when we were here that the verse, to live is Christ, to die is gain, drove me nuts. I got the to die is gain. That's why I came to him, like as a child.
Right.
Like I wanted to go live with him. That's a gain, you know.
Yeah.
But the whole to live is Christ. Grammatically, it just sounds off. Like it frustrated me. And so I remember walking around the loop and thinking, like, why isn't it to live is like Christ, or to live is for Christ? Like it just was irritating to me to hear that. And going to school here and being a part of this, you hear that verse often. I'm just like, it just irritated me. Yeah. And so I'm like, oh, I just want there to be something else. Why isn't there something else? Oh, maybe that's the point. There's not something else. And then it's like God was like, oh, finally I can work with this. Yeah. and so, there's nothing else. It's not like or for or because or it just, and some don't even have the is. It's just to live Christ. Yeah. And so I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that.
Well, that was what the Lord had to work in my heart as a young man. That, you know, I was really struggling and fighting him because I kept trying to live what I knew was right and was continuing to just be miserable.
Yeah.
And the Lord showed me Colossians 2:9-10. For in him, in Christ, all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. And in him, you've been made complete, and he's the head of all rule and authority. To come to that realization that there really is nothing else to add to everything in him, you know, and we're so messed up that we think there's more than everything, you know, that we can add something to this. We can add something to Jesus when we've been made complete in him. So now trust him.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. And and of course, you know, it is a battle. It's a battle with the flesh. You know, it's, you know, to say it is one thing. To walk in this is another. To trust him is another.
Yeah. And that's all the time.
Yeah. And he's faithful to work that.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. That's neat. Well, is there anything else you want to share with us?
Yeah. I mean, just God is so, his loving kindness is so sweet. I have the opportunity to be part of a ministry at home called Backpacks of Hope. And it's a ministry that started in 2012. And so we do backpacks with supplies for the first 24 hours and eternal for kids going into foster care mostly.
Oh, wow.
We work with the Department of Child Safety, the local branches, and it's just been so sweet. When the need was first brought up, my heart just ached for these kids, and I didn't really understand why it was aching, just deep. But God just gave me this heart of compassion, empathy for these kids when I didn't even realize why. And so that has just been so neat to see how God has opened that door, sustained it. We put God's word in these backpacks. It's just, and pray for these kids specifically. I love praying with other kids. Like the kids will pack the backpacks and then we pray specifically. And I love hearing their prayers because their God is so big. They can pray for anything. And I think as adults, we filter our prayers and we make them more realistic in our mind. And so, I love doing that. a few years into that, about the age of 40, God allowed me to start remembering abuse that I had had as a child. And so all of a sudden things started making sense. My sleep issues, being stuck in fight or flight, just all, physical things, just all those. And it made sense why I had this heart for these kids. And I remember God prompting me to share part of my testimony, and I just fought him. I'm like, no, I don't want to do it. And he said, I've given you a heart of, or the privilege of empathy with these kids. And I'm like, this is not a privilege. But just seeing that it is a privilege, and seeing how, we look at the verse that God has good works that he's prepared in advance for us to walk in, right? But then not wanting to be prepared ourselves for those good works.
Wow.
And so sometimes I've seen that God needs to prepare me for something down the road that he has for me to do, to walk in. And I was so blessed during that time to also be going through the life of Joseph. And it was really helpful for me to see Joseph's life was not okay. A lot of not great things happened to him. I mean, all the family drama happened. Right, thrown in a pit, sold to slavery, falsely accused, falsely imprisoned. I mean, the list goes on. And so at the end, when his brothers are again lying, saying, oh, by the way, Dad said, be nice to us. He said, what you meant for evil, God used for good. And that gave me permission to not just say, oh, I know it says in everything give thanks, but that had been used in my life very flippantly, of just like, oh, just give thanks for everything, and not having the permission to call evil evil. And so it's like, I can call that evil. What happened to me as a child was evil, but God
right,
used it for good.
Right.
And I can get to the point where I'm grateful for those things. I'm grateful that God prepared me, that God gave me the privilege of empathy, so that I can see him at work. I feel like I've had a front row seat to God at work in these kids' lives. We've heard testimony of how these backpacks, without God's word, without the prayers, without the handwritten notes with verses in them, it would just be a backpack of stuff. But we've seen how God has used those to change kids' lives and to bring hope into a situation where their life is upside down. And so grateful that God allowed me this life to where I get to see that and be a part of that. So it has been hard. Just a few years ago, a pastor friend of ours questioned what my thoughts were towards God the Father. He knew kind of my history, knew my story, and all of a sudden I realized that all these years, so this is just another layer of God being his loving kindness towards me, of not showing me all the areas that I think wrongly of him, not showing me all the areas I need to grow all at once, but just these layers. And I panicked, and I mean, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't swallow for a while. And he's like, why can't you say this truth about God the Father? And I'm like, because he didn't protect me as a child. And if he was a good father, he would have protected me. And so I went through a pretty dark time for a couple years ago, for a chunk of the year. And I went through where I hated John 3:16. I did not want somebody to say, I'm going to show my love to you. I'm going to demonstrate it by having my son go and be abused and killed. That's how I'm going to say I love you. And I don't want anything to do with you. But I knew that it was a package deal. And I knew I just loved Jesus. I knew I desperately needed the Holy Spirit. But I was wrestling with this hatred towards God the Father and this anger. Like, why would you do that to your son? Why would you allow me to go through that? And so it's just, I had some sweet friends that my heart was very safe with, that I shared that journey with. I said, don't try to fix me, but you can pray for me through it. And they did. And God just showed his heart towards me, and that he is a good father, and that he did go through all those things. Jesus wasn't alone in his suffering. That as the father, watching that, the heart-wrenchingness of that, and so just going through those things, and having a God that you can tell anything to. I journal, pray a lot, and so I'm writing these things down, and I think if somebody found that journal, they'd be like, whoa, what is wrong with this person? But I just think, well, he knows it anyway. He knows I'm thinking those things anyway.
Yeah.
It's not shocking to him. He can handle it.
Yeah, Hebrews 4:12. He knows.
Yeah. And so just seeing how he is sovereign and loving and currently just kind of going through, okay, you say I'm sovereign, then why are you stressed out? Why are you trying to help me? Why am I trying to help God? Why am I trying to give him ideas? Like, oh, well, have you thought about this? What about this idea? Why am I losing sleep? Why am I, why don't I lose sleep being overwhelmed at his goodness towards me? Why am I not beside myself because of his kindness towards me and his grace towards me? Like, why am I only emotional in the bad stuff?
Right.
And even seeing, like right now, just seeing how I'm labeling things as bad, but yet seeing how that one thing caused this other thing and caused this good thing, and so I need to quit labeling things as good and bad. I mean, yes, there is sin and there is evil, but just a blown tire or a somebody getting sick or somebody, like certain things that are just part of our life, quit labeling them as good and bad. If I'm trusting God to be sovereign, I can trust him to orchestrate all those things for his will.
I can identify with that, because I think, for me, the battle is that I want to determine what is good.
Right.
And as you were speaking, I was reminded of that one verse that is always given to somebody, when they're going through a hard thing, for the purpose of encouragement. And usually it just makes a person mad. Okay. And that's Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And we stop there. And, then, so we try to deal with, it's good. He's going to make it good. That means he's going to do this. He's going to fix it this way.
Our definition of
yes,
good.
Right. But you go on and he tells you what his good is in the next verse. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become, and here it is, his good, conformed to the image of his son. And that is his good. And he's faithful in that. And as you're just sharing, I'm seeing that, of what he's working in your heart, what he brings you to is what's true of him. And this is, like you were saying earlier, this is the life of Christ. For me to live is Christ. And God is faithful in that. But that's what he designed us for. That's what he created us for. And that's what we have fallen from. And that's what he's so faithful to bring back. And again, reminding me of what you said earlier too, that this is really about him. This life is about him.
Yeah, and I just feel like I'm just starting to grasp it after 30 years. We were here 30 years ago, and it was kind of, put in our heads. And yeah, he's so patient. And so why am I impatient with, why do I want other people to grow in maturity faster than I am growing in maturity? So yeah, just more and more. The last couple months, Matthew 11:28 through 29 has been brought across my path. He is hitting me over the head with it over and over and over from all different sources. And I mean, just Sunday here in Texas at Bernie Bible, Connor mentioned it again. And it's like, okay, so what does it mean to come to him? What does it mean to take his yoke? What does it mean to learn from him? What does it mean to find a resting place for my soul? So I love that. That's another layer. That's another thing that currently he's like, okay, daughter, this is what I have for you next. This is what I want you to learn. And so, yeah, I'm digging into it and like, okay, what does this mean? That sounds really good. A resting place for my soul. So I don't know yet. I don't know what message he's wanting me to get, but yeah, if God puts a verse in your life over and over and over from all different sources, like maybe just stop and dig into it.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Amy, I thank you so much.
Yeah.
I know we could just keep going. We could just keep talking, and maybe we'll pick up this conversation again next year, maybe. But I do appreciate, because I know you're willing to do these things, but you're not looking. you're not looking for this.
Yeah.
We had a funny conversation this morning. You said something to the effect that, Lord, I'm just available to what you want. And then this comes up and you said, not that.
Yeah. Well, that's not quite what I meant.
And
yes.
No, that I understand, but I appreciate you doing this and just being, being open and faithful to encourage us back to Jesus.
Well, if I can share with others and who God is and how he's revealed himself to me, and that will never stop. But those are just some highlights of how God has shown himself to me over the years. And we get eternity to keep finding out more.
That's right.
More things
That's
about
right.
him.
To keep learning. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You've been listening to the His Hill podcast featuring our host, Kelly Doherty, along with alumna Amy Jo Moore. Thanks so much for tuning in with us this week. We are excited to welcome guests to the Hilltop in just 5 days for our annual Thanksgiving conference. Our speakers this year are Peter Reed and Charles Price. Sessions will be available to view online at hishill.org if you are unable to attend in person. This conference week is always such an encouragement to us in the Hilltop, and we hope it is an encouragement for those who attend as well. Please keep us in your prayers as the conference approaches and unravels, that we would love well and give God the glory in all that we do here. Thanks again for tuning in with us this week to another episode of the His Hill podcast. Remember to keep your eyes fixed on Christ. I'm Lizzie, and we'll see you next week.